Deacon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me.
Very happy to have you. So, first off, why don't you tell me a little bit about your company, Well Kept Wallet?
It started when my wife and I got married. We realized, hey, we were in debt and we needed to figure out a way to pay off our debt, right? And so, I had come across. I learned from other people that have been successful, right? So I read Warren Buffett's The Snowball, Dave Ramsey, all these different people, and I was like, man, I think we could do this. So we paid off our debt in 18 months, and I was like, I wish I could help other people do the same thing, like develop a game plan, execute, and then have the results. And so that's where Well Kept Wallet was born. Was how do we help people, the average person that's struggling with their finances, achieve whatever their financial goals are? And so that was back in 2010 when I started about 13 years ago. And since then, we've evolved greatly. But really now we're more of an online education company, helping people understand personal finance when it comes to making money, saving money, and paying off debt.
No, that's great. And I think I read somewhere that it was pretty sizable. I mean, it was about, $50,000 worth of debt, right? I mean, I don't want to air too much dirty laundry, but that's what I've read is you're pretty proud to say 18 months, 52K. That's not easy to do. And especially, I guess this leads into my next question. Do you, is your formal education in like financial planning or that was something that you literally just started reading up on and are pretty self-educated on?
Yeah, so for the most part, self-educated. I did not grow up learning about sound financial principles.
Hmm.
And so it was one of those things where I was selling wood floors at the time.
Cool.
So wood flooring is very different from personal finance,
Yeah.
but it was a 100% commission job. So, whatever I sold is what I had to pay my bills, right? And it was a very cutthroat industry. But in that, I learned a lot about money management. I learned a lot about, from other people, like the authors I'd mentioned,
Hmm.
on how to manage money effectively versus the way that I had grown up learning, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I was very much self-taught, and I ended up becoming a financial planner for a number of years, just to kind of see if I liked that. But I realized financial planners only make money off of wealthy people. They don't. I mean, the lowest tier person was $250,000 of assets in investable assets. Well, most people don't have $250,000 at all, right?
Hmm.
So it was like, how do I reach the regular people with this message? And so that's kind of what started Well Kept Wallet.
No, that's amazing. I think that's a great way to pivot. So, in Well Kept Wallet, in the company, you have a master class, right? I think that's kind of, it reminds me a lot of like a blog, but I think the guts of the program is a master class. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. What do you go over in that master class? Like, what would be a typical syllabus that people could expect?
Yeah, so the idea is kind of like personal finance 101. It's like, okay, how do I create a budget that actually works? Because most people have created a budget, but they're like, I can't stick to it. I can't get it to work. So that's like the first part. Then the second part is like, well, do you have debt? If you have debt, how do you effectively tackle that debt, especially high interest debt, so that you're not paying interest to other people, but you're making interest on your money? And then the third part would be understanding how to track your progress, right? So it's
Hmm.
like not only do you have a budget, but do you also have a net worth statement that shows here's your assets, here's your liability, and here's how much you have, in assets you have, your net
Hmm.
worth. And you want to see that grow over time. And then there's a lot of actionable stuffs on how do you increase your revenue or how do you make more money and how do you decrease your expenses. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what that masterclass is.
No, that's great. And in the entire well-kept wallet universe, we'll say, do you go more over tips and tricks, or are you more hands-on large-scale strategies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of both, right? We've seen a lot of different scenarios. Like I said, I was on a variable income. So I know a lot of people that are entrepreneurs, that's where they live. They don't have a
Hmm.
consistent paycheck every month, right? So it's like,
Hmm.
well, how do you budget on a variable income? Then we also have more like the planning aspects, like, well, what are your financial goals in life? Is it to be debt free? Is it to retire early? Is it to put your kids through college, right? So really just kind of understanding like what's your full financial picture that you want for you and your family, and then how do you achieve it? And so, yeah, we have a lot of tips and tricks, but then also the kind of that bigger picture. What does financial life look like 5, 10, 20 years from now?
And I think those goals are extremely important to actually sit down and go over. Because usually, at least for me, and I can speak to my personal experience, it's like right now I need to buy a car. So that's something that pops up, I handle it, and then I move on to the next thing once I have the car. You just kind of get money to spend it without really thinking about that goal of retirement, unless you finally decide I want a house. So being able to sit down and go over that with someone and say, what are your long-term goals from A to Z? I think is valuable that a lot of people might take for granted that they don't do. In
For
terms of
sure.
kind of comparing those tips and tricks and the larger strategies, would you say that one might be more important than the other? Because I think I'm one that thinks that small details matter. The best way to eat an elephant is a bite at a time, and think that kind of like tips and tricks, things like that, can actually amass to something that can get rid of $50,000 a day. But everyone wants to kind of cater to larger scale strategies of how do I do that in a week, or whatever. So I'm curious if you have any opinion or even more importantly, insight on that.
Yeah, I think the first thing, like when you're running a business, you want to have a P&L. You want to know what your profit, what your loss is, what all your costs are, all that kind of thing. And so I think the similar thing with your personal finances is like really having a detailed snapshot of like what does your financial picture look like?
Hmm.
And then to your point, at that level, you're going through the detail and then saying, hey, how can I make this smaller? When we're
Hmm.
talking about your expenses, right? How can I increase my income, right? Is there something that I can do to leverage my time or my resources to be able to increase more income to achieve a goal faster? So I think, yeah, it's the first part is kind of the more nitty gritty of like, how do I get the detailed picture of what it looks like? And then it's, hey, okay, well, what do I need to do? What action items do I need to take to be in a better position when it comes
Hmm.
to my expenses and my income? And for each person, that's different. I mean, I was talking to someone today, and it was basically talking about how looking at your monthly expenses that are fixed, like let's say your insurance or your cell phone. It's like, well, they're paying $175 for two cell phones. Well, you could easily switch to another provider for $100, or they're paying $250 for car insurance. And I'm like, I'm sure they can spend $150. Like it's literally case by case, person by person.
Yeah.
But once you have that picture, then you have kind of a direction of where to go and what needs to be done.
Hmm. Does that make it difficult to kind of make posts, logs, long form generalized posts because it is so case by case? I mean, you seem to do it successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I think for at least for content that goes on the site, we definitely want it to be thorough. We definitely want it to be unique, and so it can be takes time. It's time
Yeah.
consuming. We have writers and editors and such, but I think yeah, I think because it is, even though it's so unique by person, the principles are still the same, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
we can write an article about how to make a budget that works, and that will apply to someone that makes 50 grand a month or 50 grand a year.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah.
And you've mentioned it a few times, business versus personal finance. I'm curious if you have any familiarity in speaking on the differences between the two, and the similarities between the two.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think with business, you have a lot of overhead, right? Especially if you're talking about e-commerce and you're saying, hey, well, I have physical products, I have storing of those products. You might have employees that you have to pay, salaries or hourly wage to. You have all of these different things. At the end of the day, though, it still comes to what's your revenue and what's your expenses, right? And then with, for your personal sides, what's your income and what's your expenses. So the principles are very much similar. I think the one thing that can differ a little bit is where debt plays a role.
Mm.
In the personal life, I'm a huge advocate of being debt free, of not having, debt, because when you have debt, you have obligations you have to pay no matter what your financial situation can be. And so, but when you're in business, that can be different, right? I run Google ads, and Google ads, I'm putting on a credit card and then I'm paying it off, right? So I think that, there can be a use case for using debt wisely in business. There, from the people that I've encountered who have emailed or met with or whatever the case may be, on the personal side, when it comes to debt, it can be the most debilitating thing. On the
Hmm.
business side, it can be a huge way to scale. So that's the one difference that I see between personal and business.
Hmm. No, I think that's incredibly valid. Are there some specific financial practices that entrepreneurs or maybe even in personal financing, that they might not really totally have a grasp on? from your understanding? Is there a commonality between the people that you talk to that is misunderstood or they don't fully understand?
Yeah, well, I'll say that the two things that come to mind are the use of debt, and then the second one will be emergency reserves, right?
Okay.
So I think the first thing is if you're going to use debt, if you use credit cards to run ads or to buy products, the goal would be to pay it off within the 30-day time frame so that you're not paying the ridiculous 20% interest. And as simple as that sounds, it's so easy running a business to just be like, hey, I'm gonna put that on a credit card and then not have enough revenue to support it. And then you're paying this ridiculous interest rate. And nobody wants to pay 20% on anything, right? So,
Hmm.
so the first thing would be like, if you are going to use debt for your business, especially credit cards, make sure to pay it off monthly. The second thing is to have like an emergency fund for your business account, because most people don't realize, like, especially when you have large businesses with lots of inventory, things you have to fund, it could be one bad thing that happens and, you could go bankrupt. You could, have to take on a really high interest loan. You could be put in a corner. So what I typically say is I would say you have 6 months to a year in reserves. So what I mean by that is if your expenses, let's say, are $20,000 per month, then you'd want to have $120,000 to $240,000 in reserves to be able to pay for anything that's unforeseeable. And even if you get an opportunity, maybe you could buy some inventory at a fraction of a cost, and you've got that money sitting there where you can take advantage of it versus you're like, well, I don't have the funds, so therefore I can't do it, right?
Mm.
So I think really those two things, how to use debt wisely when it comes to business, and then how to make sure that you have enough emergency reserves to be able to weather storms and to be able to take advantage of opportunities like that.
And I like how you mentioned emergency in almost like a positive usage there. A lot of times I think we think of that money that has to be set to the side for if something bad happens, like a truck gets lost or something to that effect. But if there's a incredible sale on something, that is exactly what that emergency reserve can be used for too. Am I hearing you say that correctly?
I mean, I'm using it a little bit liberally in that sense. The main purpose is to weather the storms, but having those cash reserves, yes, to your point, you can take advantage of opportunities that other people can't because you have the cash and they don't.
Wonderful. No, I think that's incredible. Are there certain practices and strategies? This is kind of a follow-up to the same idea in my earlier question. Are there certain practices and strategies that are better off left to a financial planner due to a certain level of expertise, or is the whole goal to teach the man to fish, not fish for him?
Yeah, what I'll say is everybody's financial situation is different, right? And so, when you have family-owned businesses, that can be a great opportunity to be like, okay, you need to seek a financial planner for succession, right? What does that look like to pass the business down, take take advantage of tax breaks and things like that. If you want to do specific planning when it comes to taxes and stuff of that nature, yeah, of course, planners can have a huge value in helping you save tons of money when it comes to saving money on taxes. Nobody wants to pay more taxes than they need to, right? So there are opportunities there. I'd say when it comes to, creating your own budget, sticking to it on a regular basis, making sure that you set your own financial goals, like how much money do you want to put away for retirement every month? How
Mhm.
much money do you want to put away towards your kids' college? How much money do you want to put towards paying off debt? Like really, you as an individual can take the ownership of saying, I can do that on my own without a planner. And
Mm.
then when you run into snags, when you have questions that are a little bit more above and beyond, then you could seek somebody out that is professional and has that
Mhm.
knowledge and can help you. But I'd say for like 90% of people, they can do the majority of the work themselves, and kind of have their base foundation set.
Mhm. And how does out of curiosity, well-kept wallet make its money? Because I go to the website and it looks like a blog. I know there's a masterclass, but that's generally it looks like a lot of information for free. Is part of it through maybe sponsorships and partners, or is it mostly the masterclass? I'm kind of curious how you've run a successful business for, about a dozen years. Is that correct?
Yeah, about 13 years. So
Yeah.
the three main sources of revenue, and we added a fourth, but the three main are display ads, affiliate
Okay.
relationships, sponsored relationships. So we'll have brands that say, hey, we want more exposure. We want to get in front of your audience. What does that look like? We have an email list. We have, ways that we can promote them on the site. And then we've also added a course, which is debt free in 18 months to help people tackle their debt. Right. So we added courses, not out of need, but more out of like, there's a need from the consumer, from people to consume online content. And so those are the four main ways that we make money.
Mm-hmm. And do you consider the business more? I mean, obviously, there's a service you're providing in financial planning, but it is also extremely content based. I mean, that's part of what their the income is coming from is sponsorships or kind of sponsoring the content. Do you consider it just as much, if not more, of a content based business than a financial planning services business?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a funny thing when people ask me what I do, right? I actually tell them I'm a digital publisher, because
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm not a financial planner anymore. I'm more of a personal finance expert, if you will. But most of our revenue, most of what we do is create content that provides sound financial principles that if people apply it, their lives change, they come back to our site. So yeah, it's much more of a content business than it is planning for sure.
And is that kind of how have you been able to grasp and adapt to morphing it kind of into that? Because it sounds like you started planning your own finances, started helping other people, and then at some point there was a shift where you kind of bifurcated into this is also content. That is a market in and of itself.
Well,
When did you figure that out? Yeah, what was that process like?
yeah, I would say it was probably about 8 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
what I realized is like me meeting with people or having conversations or speaking is not scalable, right? It's like I have to be at a certain place in time.
Yeah.
Well, what if I created a YouTube video that I could provide to thousands, if not millions of people that would provide this information that they could access at any time? And we could reach them through the email newsletter, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, what if I created an article? So there's all these different avenues. We said, hey, if then we can basically scale my time to where I can help more people than just one-on-one or in group situations. And that has been a huge, I mean, we've ridden so many waves from having, viral videos on TikTok or YouTube or Pinterest, or not
Mm-hmm.
specifically content on Pinterest, Facebook posts going viral. Like there's so many different ways to get traffic, where I was just a guy that liked helping people figure out how to get out of their debt fast. And now I'm like, well, now I feel like sometimes I'm a Pinterest expert or I'm a YouTube expert or I'm like you have all these different things you have to learn and grow and adapt to over time. And so it's been kind of not a roller coaster, but it's been a learning experience over the past, say, 8 years of learning
Mm-hmm.
each platform, where we're going to spend the most time, and how to help people through each platform most effectively.
And that's kind of a running theme that we have on the show here is that difference between jack of all trades, a master of one, and I'm curious your perspective on if had that having to adapt and learn all these different platforms has been able to take too much of your time from actually being able to like master financial planning ad nauseum, or if that's actually given you insight on how to welcome new technology and platforms, probably more easily than others who haven't had to learn 8 different ones quite quickly.
Yeah, I always joke that like you can learn everything that needs to be known about personal finance on one sheet of paper, right? So I mean, it really is. It's like live on less than you make, diversify your investments wisely, and that's pretty much it. Like, I mean, and obviously there's more detail to what does that look like? How do I live on less than I make? Well, you got to make more income, decrease your expenses. What does that look like? Different for each person. What does diversifying my investments look like? Different for each person. But at the end of the day, it's very simple. So I'd say I'm pretty good on that because I think it's time tested. There's a lot of data to back it up. I will say we used to get most of our traffic from Google. And the fact that I was able to be a jack of all trades and learn different sources of traffic, when the helpful content update comes out, even though traffic's down, like we have other sources of traffic that it's not the end of the world,
Mhm.
So I think it's been helpful to be able to kind of know the different platforms, how they work and how to adapt and pivot when necessary. Because if I just focused on one lane, I would be left wondering like, what do I do right now? Because this is all I know.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it's been helpful for sure to kind of know the different lanes and which one to adapt to and when.
And part of the reason you've had that success in terms of uh, Google being able to make money from, sponsorships and affiliates is a wide variety of media attention from pretty well-known companies. Like I think Fox News was one of them. I'm curious how you go about getting that attention, honestly, just as maybe a piece of advice to entrepreneurs listening, because it's easier to get on this than it is to have like Forbes or Yahoo Finance write about you.
For
To my
sure.
understanding, maybe that's actually a misconception that you can help me with.
Well, I think people can probably pay now to get featured on those places, unfortunately. But yeah, that's not that. But I think for us, it was crafting a story that it's kind of our true story, right? So our
Mhm.
initial story that was pitched was like newlywed couple pays off $52,000 of debt in 18 months, right? And so we got one feature in the U.S. News and World Report, and then from that, I think I got another outlet, I think it was Fox News, that said, "Hey, we'd love to fly you and your wife to New York City to be on the show." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Sure, that'd be great." So we share a story there. And then I'm like, well, if it works for national, I bet you it works for local. So then I looked up who are the different news outlets in my area and who are the people to contact, producers or whatever the news wire was or whatever. And I just emailed them cold and just said, I think I copied and pasted whatever the headline was from U.S. News and World Report. I was like, newlywed couple pays off $52,000 in 18 months. And I just sent it. And sure enough, we had, I don't know, a handful of different outlets, local Fox, ABC, etc. Were able to share our story. So I think for people listening to the podcast, at least, it's like, what's your story?
Uh-huh.
What can you craft in a clear and concise? And if you want to use Chat GPT, you can. But yeah, just what's your story and make it something that's clickable. And I was just shocked at how, especially if it's relatable, right? I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are in debt. A lot of people want to pay it off in a short period of time. It could be, I have a friend that was a teacher that now runs a 7-figure online business, right? So from teacher to 7-figure online business owner, right? So it's like, what is your story and how can you pitch it to not only national, but local media?
hmm It's like, typical three-act structure. You have to read the article to get the second act. I had debt, I fixed it. This is how I did it. People tune in to get that second act. Out of curiosity, is your wife involved with the company?
She's not. No, I mean, she's supportive of it. I tried to get her to write. She wrote one article on the site, I think back in 2010, and it was something like "Debt free is sexy," and it actually did pretty well. But that was it. That's the extent of her involvement. But obviously, she loves the business and is a huge supporter of it.
Sure. What are some more common misconceptions about that people might have about financial planning just in general? Is one, I mean, for example, one that I hear you say is um, the guts, the meats and potatoes you could put on a sheet of paper. I think that really is enlightening to me. Are there other sort of misconceptions about financial planning in general that you'd like to dispel?
Well, one of the things, if I can share a parable, I'll make it short, but it's the American and the Mexican fisherman, right? So the American goes to Mexico and he sees a fisherman fishing, and he notices that he's only out for like an hour, and then he leaves, and he comes back the same time next day, goes out for an hour, leaves, and the American goes up to the Mexican and said, "So why do you only work an hour a day?" And he's like, "Well, this is all I need to do to get the food that I need for my family and the money." And he's like, "What do you do after you fish?" And he's like, "Well, I go home and I play with my kids, and then I have lunch, and then my wife and I hang out, and then I take a siesta, and then we have dinner, and then the next day I go back out and fish again, right?" And so the American's like, "But you could work more hours," and the Mexican's like, "What do I do if I work more hours?" It's like, "Well, then you could buy another boat." And then you can hire someone. And he's like, "What do I do then?" And he's like, "Well, then you have a fleet of boats." And he's like, "Okay, well then what I do?" "Well, then one day you could retire and you could go play with your kids and you could play guitar and have, have lunch with your wife and have a siesta. And it's like, but I already do that. Right. Like, I think there's this misconception that I can retire someday, right? If I do all these things now, I'll be able to have that life that I really want. And the
Mhm.
question I would have for people listening is like, no, what do you really want? And maybe that's not as complicated and far off as you think it is, right?
Mhm.
And how do you plan for that, right? And so I know for me, that was kind of eye-opening to be like, okay, yeah, you could create this, $100 million company and that would provide X, lifestyle versus, well, what if you had 30 million or 10 million or
Mhm.
1 million, whatever it is for the person listening? That can be eye-opening, right? This myth that I need to have some giant pile of money down the road to be able to do what I want. It's like, no, maybe you can do that sooner than you think.
Yeah, I think that's extremely succinct way to wrap it up too, is like I am not the best at finances, but and I could probably make more money, but I don't really, if I'm being really candid, I don't really plan on retiring. I'm a freelancer, so I get to make my own schedule and be the Mexican in that scenario a little bit, is hang out with my kid, take some weeks off, take some days off, and kind of do a little bit more of what I want because that's more important to me now than it is when I'm 60, 65, if you want something, why don't you get it as quick as possible? I think that's a really valid anecdote, Deacon. Before we wrap up, I ask my guests the same last question, and it actually plays really nicely into that anecdote. In the world of e-commerce and finance, it can be stress inducing, and it can that ability to want to keep chasing that enterprise can be exhausting, and it can take a wear on people's mental health. I'm curious how you spend your free time in terms of hobbies and interests to have a healthy work-life harmony, balance, and good mental hygiene.
Yeah, one of the things that I enjoy doing is rapping. So I actually released a rap song called Everyday Millionaire that with a buddy of mine, but I think that there's
Love
music
it.
is part of what I do. And then spend time with my family. We love to travel, we love to do things, create experiences. I mean, remember we went to California and we did this dolphin tour, and I'm just like watching my kids with the joy on their face, and the dolphins are just right next to the boat. And you're like, this is what it's about, right? It's like
Uh,
it's enjoying life together as a family, creating those memories. And so those are some of the things that just come to mind when you ask.
that's remarkable, man. Thank you so much for your time, Deacon. Good luck with Well Kept Wallet.
Thanks, Alex.